Hello and welcome to Spyhards podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. Busy playing Scrabble, so leave me alone, Scott.
I often prefer to leave you alone, Cam. I would rather do this all by myself.
That's what you keep telling me via email every day.
And text, and any other way I can contact you. AOL, ICQ.
That's right, yeah. And when you're like hacking into my computer and implanting messages that say such a thing, yes.
Which takes us back in time to an earlier age of ICQ, of AOL, of dial-up internet, and the 1990s.
What a glorious time to be alive. And I was there, folks. It was glorious.
According to Cam, what he just inferred there, I wasn't. Despite us only having a couple of years age difference. I just didn't exist until the year 2000.
Scott's one of those people that calls The Dark Knight an old movie.
I am the Millennium Bug. We're traveling back to a film we covered in 2024, one that we both hold near and dear to our hearts. It made the knock list, and that is, of course, Sneakers. And we had a really great review last year with Simon Brew from Film Stories. And then we also had one of the co-writers of the film, Mr. Lawrence Lasker, join us that very same week to help us break down the film as well. But we wanted more.
We wanted to sneak around more.
We did. And how are we doing that, Cam?
We are talking this week to Phil Alden Robinson, the co-writer and director of Sneakers, who has done some other films you may have heard of. I don't know, Field of Dreams, perhaps, as well as The Sum of All Fears, the Ben Affleck, Jack Ryan film.
I mean, the man's credentials could go on for days, and this interview is one of the most in-depth ones I think we've ever done. We're both very proud of it. So I think without further ado, let's get to the man himself, Mr. Phil Alden Robinson. Take it away. We've been waiting for this one for quite some time. We know you have been to at-home spy movie fans. Joining us on the show, the man behind Sneakers and The Sum of All Fears, Academy Award nominated director, Mr. Phil Alden Robinson. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
All the better for seeing you.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
We've got a lot to dive into. Sneakers is beloved by Spyhards listeners. We didn't tackle it for 4 years on the show, and we had constant emails and letters. Well, not letters, mostly emails and tweets saying, talk about Sneakers. So we're finally talking about it, and I can't wait to bring it to everyone. But let's go back a little bit. Pre-Sneakers, pre-Field of Dreams. What made you want to get into the filmmaking business in the first place?
I have to remember, I was a journalist, and I was working in radio and then TV news. And I got to do a documentary one day, and I enjoyed the longer form. I enjoyed having more time to tell a story. And I didn't really make a decision to become a filmmaker. I was leading the unexamined life, and I just bounced from one thing to another. And I found myself in California doing educational TV and corporate films and training films, very, very dull stuff. And I remember waking up one morning thinking, I guess I'm a filmmaker. I guess this is what I do. And if this is what I do, then I should try to do it for the big boys. And there was no way to get there from here. It's like for a couple of years, I thought I'll just keep doing these little industrial films and someone in Hollywood will see it and say, hey, you there, you're awfully good. Come on over here. And of course, that just never happened. So I had to kind of stop and turn down work I was working on and write something on spec and try to get noticed by Hollywood.
Because it is kind of a perception business as well. Because putting that sort of doing the corporate stuff to one side, if you didn't do that, people would think you were just doing two things at once and not focusing. Because my wife is a photographer, and she had to go through the same sort of thing, switching into being a photographer. You had to fully commit to get those calls.
I remember turning down a series of sales training films for Gallo Wines. And I had accepted the job. They sent me all this material, and I sent it back to them. And I said, I don't do this anymore. And it felt to me like, and this is a very American thing, as a boy, you go to on the weekends, you go to the playground to play ball, but the playground is locked. So you're going to have to climb the fence. And so what you do is you throw your glove over the fence into the playground because now you have to climb the fence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and sending that material back to Gallo Wines felt to me like I was throwing my glove over the fence, and now I had to do this. I had to make this new step.
Well, that's a very apt metaphor for the director of Field of Dreams.
And actually, you talk about sort of being a boy. One of the questions I had before we lead into sneakers is kind of about spy movies and spy media. In your life growing up to the point maybe when you became a director in film, was spy film something that interested you? Had you seen many as a young lad?
I didn't see a lot as a kid. I wasn't into films as a kid. As a kid, I was obsessed with television.
Hmm.
And there were some good spy-like shows on television. But as I got older and could appreciate the complexities of a good spy story, because good spy stories are really complex and the best ones are about something else. They're metaphorical or they're thematic. And and then I really got into it. I mean, I think reading John le Carré opened me up in a lot of ways to what a great spy story can be. And I remember coming out of seeing The Sting, which felt to me like a spy story. It's a caper film, but it felt like a spy story in a way. And I remember walking out of the theater thinking, that is the coolest world to inhabit, this world of mysteries and secrets and people pretending to be one thing when there's something else. And it's a particularly fertile field for movies. I think movies are really, really good at that sort of thing.
Well, I was curious. Did you have a favorite Le Carre novel or story?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, Tinker Tailor is hard to beat. A Perfect Spy, which is about his father, I think is just a magnificent book. And you know, Spy Who Came from the Cold is great. Smiley's People is great. There are just so many that I just devoured and actually will go back to from time to time and reread. Tinker Tailor in particular taught me one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned about writing, which is to be thematic with your characters. Here's a story about George Smiley, retired from the British Secret Service and living alone because his wife was famously unfaithful to him. He's called back by the Secret Service to find the mole at the highest levels of the British Secret Service. So the political story, the big plotline story, is about betrayal. His personal story that he's dealing with is about betrayal, that of his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And putting those two things together like that means the story has greater meaning than just the plot. It's an exploration of betrayal, both on the personal level and the political level. And that's what a great writer will do. He'll find ways of connecting the granular to the broad strokes. And it's something I try to remember all the time when I'm writing.
Did you ever consider adapting Le Carre as a film?
The great ones have been adapted.
Yeah.
You know, I had an idea some years ago about updating one of his stories, and I realized it was too much. You
Mm.
know, it was too much pressure. And I think many of his adaptations were quite good. I think I've enjoyed all of them. They haven't been perfect, but I've really enjoyed them because at the heart of them is a really smart, complex, layered, meaningfully put together story.
I think a lot of our listeners just cheered and jumped for joy when they heard that you were a fan of John le Carre. I think that's it just ties it together a lot. It's nice to hear, and there have been some good adaptations that we've seen. There's been some mixed ones too along the way.
I will tell you, and I hope he doesn't mind my quoting him. The the first time I met David Mamet, he said to me, "Who are you reading?" And I said, Le Carre. And he said, "Yeah, greatest living English language novelist."
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's a pretty good recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah. And David Mamet, I would definitely take his recommendations. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. I mean, Le Carre, because he writes in the spy genre, I think for a long time was relegated in some people's minds and their perception to being a spy genre writer. He's a brilliant novelist. And this just happens to be the world he's writing about.
And it's it's fair to say, like, trying to adapt one of his books, it's quite a tough task to get them off the ground nowadays. I mean, they did the Night Manager for a season on BBC, and it took them
Right.
6 years to now start doing a second season, just because of contractual nonsense and things like that. Like it's unfortunate, but I'm glad they are getting made slowly.
I do think part of the problem there, and I don't know anything about that series. I enjoyed the series a lot, that first season, but they told the story of the book.
Mm.
And to do another season means you have to use that milieu and those characters to come up with a brand new made for television story. And I think that's really hard to do.
Yeah. There was some work done many moons ago after that first season came out. I'll tell you some more off air, but we know things that we can't share on air. But let's trail away from Jean le Carré. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it sounded pretty good. Let's get to Sneakers, because I think that's what I want to talk about now. And I think you go from Field of Dreams, this, I mean, a pinnacle of Americana films. I would always say, one I think about when American films, Field of Dreams is one that comes to my mind. It's a wonderful film, and Sneakers you follow up with, but there is a bit of a gap in between. So how does Sneakers first come to you?
Sneakers came to me long before Field of Dreams did. In 1981 or 82, Walter Parks and Larry Lasker, who had written War Games and were in production on War Games at the time, hired me to write an idea that they had. When they were researching the script that became War Games, they learned of the existence of this shadowy world of people called sneakers, also called tiger teams or black hatters. And they said, boy, this would be a great milieu for a movie. A bunch of these guys get hired to do something and they're misled, and now they have to undo the damage they've done. They called it a high-tech Dirty Dozen. That was their idea. They had no story. They didn't know the characters. They just thought, the Dirty Dozen, you recruit a team of ragtag guys to go do something, but put that in the high-tech world. They sold that pitch to 20th Century Fox, where they were writing another movie. So they hired me to write this. They had read something I'd written and liked it. We met, I think, every day for almost a year to talk about the story, to talk about characters. We spent probably half that time developing a story about a space-based laser anti-missile defense system. It has nothing to do with the movie we eventually wrote. But we spent
James Bond vibes there coming in a little bit.
Yeah.
Very much. We spent a lot of time working on that. We were interviewing scientists and mathematicians and computer security experts and hackers, and we met all kinds of interesting people, and we just kept filing away all this knowledge. At the end of that year, I hadn't written a word. We still didn't have a story. And another script of mine was going into production. It was called All of Me, with Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to them, guys, I've got to go do this thing. I'm going to be on the set with the director. So I've got to take a little break here. And they said, all right, tell you what, why don't you go work on that? While you're gone, we'll write a first draft of Sneakers. We'll figure out what we need to do to write a first draft of Sneakers. When you come back, you rewrite it. I said, great. So I came back almost a year later, and they had written a partial draft. They had written about 2/3 of a draft. The Playtronics Sneak, which is now the third act of our movie, was their second act.
Okay.
And they just didn't know how to follow that. And I said, well, the reason you don't know how to follow it is that's a third act. That's just the sneak to end the movie. So let me redo everything that leads up to that and then make this work for the ending. They said, great, go do that. We were constantly throwing pages back and forth to each other and spent probably another 5-6 years at that point, during which time my favorite book, Shoeless Joe, got optioned. I got hired to write it and direct it, so I took another year or so off from Sneakers. Came back. I had a deal at Universal at that point, and I said to the guys, let's finish Sneakers. We hadn't done any work on it for a year or two. Let's just roll up our sleeves and finish this. Let's set it up under my deal at Universal. Universal likes the idea. And all this time I was saying, I'm not going to direct this. This is not for me. This is, there's people who do this, what I call the shiny stuff, really
Mm.
well. And we finished the script. Uh, we were talking about who's going to direct it, and Walter and Larry said, "Well, you should direct this." I said, "Nah, I think there's people who do this better." And Walter, who's a very smart guy, said to me, "Okay, I understand you're not going to direct it, but just for the sake of discussion, under what narrowly defined set of circumstances would you direct it?" And because I'm naive, I answered the question. And then he immediately went to the studio and said, "Let's give him this, 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 and this, and he'll direct the movie." And the next thing I knew, they had agreed to everything I had wanted. And so that was, I think that was probably 9 years during that time. After Field of Dreams, I took a year off just to kind of recoup and then came back to Sneakers. But from the time we started till the time we ended, it was 9 years. And on the final draft, it says on the cover page, Sneakers based on 27 man years of drafts by Phil, Walter, and Larry.
Wow. Did the tone change much? Because it has a very like light comic tone, and obviously there's the heist energy as well. But did it go through different permutations where like the tone was just completely different, like more serious, perhaps?
Interestingly enough, the tone was always there because that tone is me, Larry, and Walter.
Mm.
When we would get together, we would spend as much time exploring these very arcane scientific or intellectual ideas as we spent laughing. And we all had a very similar frequency that we worked on. And I think it was always like that. The characters were always going to be these ragtag guys that couldn't get hired by anybody else. In the very early drafts, Whistler and Mother owned a little makeshift recording studio, and they recorded punk bands. And I'm trying to think who else. There was a Zen master guy who did something, I forget what, but it was always a kind of a eyebrow raising kind of group of guys. You say, really, you're going to trust your job to these guys? And we enjoyed that. And early on, Bishop was always our age. In the very first draft, it says he's 30, and it actually says in the scene description, Kreese is the old one. He's 42.
Hmm.
We were all 42 when we made the film.
Right.
So every year those characters aged a year,
Well, I think looking at that sort of package they got together for you to get you to sign on as director, they turn around and say, "We've got this, it's yours." Was there still a reluctance on your end to take the film on as a director, even though they basically met your demands?
Huge. It's based partly on, at heart, I'm a writer. That's what I'm sort of wired to do. And at the time, I felt I direct out of defense. I'm directing to sort of protect my writing. And on Field of Dreams, I didn't enjoy the process. I found it physically very demanding, but also emotionally very demanding. And what I mean by that is that every day at dailies, I would see the previous day's footage, and I would think, it's not what I had in my head. And every day at the Field of Dreams dailies, I wanted to slit my wrists. I just thought, I'm ruining this project that I love, this book that I love. I'm not getting it. And I was pretty depressed. And finishing the film, the editing, it got better in post-production because every day in post-production, the movie gets better. A little bit better here, a little bit better there. Then we started screening it for people, and people really liked it. So I got a better feeling about it then, but I sure wasn't, I was not sure that I wanted to ever direct again. I wasn't sure I wanted to go through that emotional distress again. I remember talking to a friend of mine who's an actress while I was shooting the film, and she said, "You're suffering for your art, pal."
Hmm.
And I thought, yeah, I think that's what it is, and I'm not sure I want to do that. It's too hard. So I took a year off after shooting that film to decide what to do with my life because I thought, okay, I'm not going to direct again. And I don't want to write something for someone else to direct. So I'm not going to write again. So what am I going to do? And it didn't take me long to realize I can't do anything else. I'm not qualified to get a job. So I decided I'll write again and maybe I'll direct, but I'm only going to take on projects that I'm passionate about, that mean something important to me, that I'm willing to go through the psychic hell and self-doubt and flagellation of filmmaking. So that's why it took a couple of years. I was offered everything after Field of Dreams, and I just turned it all down because I just was, I didn't want to go through that labyrinth of pain again unless it was something really important to me. And Sneakers, although it is lighthearted, was really important to me because I thought it was very smart about some emerging issues, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. But also, I love the tone. The tone of that script is exactly what I look for in entertainment. That's what I most love. And I remember Walter and Larry and I one day saying early on, you know what we're doing? We're writing one of those for us. We're writing this for us, you know. It's one of those movies that these days are more for kids. We want to write one of those movies for us. And that's really why we went through 9 years of writing, was to make a movie that we wanted to go see.
It's so interesting. You had basically these two miracle movies because Field of Dreams, you're stressed the entire production, thinking it's not working, and look at the legacy of it now. I actually just went and saw it fairly recently with my dad. For Father's Day, they showed it with an orchestra doing the score, and it was
Oh, in Vancouver.
yeah,
I almost went.
it was wonderful.
Oh,
Yeah, it
great.
was really wonderful. But it obviously has this huge life and importance going forward. And then Sneakers, there are no shortage of projects that are developed over years and years and years that by the time they get to the screen, you go, well, you can see that, this was overworked to a certain degree. And yet again, the movie comes out very nimble and playful and light, and it feels almost bulletproof in its structure.
Hmm. Oh, I'm glad you feel that way because we worked really, really, really hard on that. And the reviews that pained me were not the bad reviews that said this is stupid or whatever. The reviews that pained me are the ones that said, "Well, this is a simple plot."
Right.
Fuck, it is. We worked 9 years on that.
There's a name that we haven't mentioned yet when it comes to Sneakers, and that is our man Robert Redford.
Yeah.
I mean, what an opportunity to work with Robert Redford in the first place. I mean, to spend time with him must be just fantastic in itself, away from directing him or anything. A director in his own right as well. Like, that is the crazy thing about all this. When does Robert enter the picture, and what is that like in terms of transforming it?
We were finishing the script. We were making lists of actors, and again, that the actor for Bishop was always our age. And I think this would be like probably 1990 or 91. What year did Dances with Wolves come out? Was that 91 or 90?
1990.
90. Okay, good. So early in 1991, probably February or March, I was at Kevin's Oscar party. He had a watching party. The night of the Oscars, all his friends were gathered at a restaurant to watch the Academy Awards. And a CAA agent came over to me, whom I knew, came over to me and he said, "Hey, Phil, I'm working really hard to get Bob in your movie." I said,
Hmm.
"Bob who?" And he said, "Redford." I said, "Redford? What movie?" He said, "Sneakers." I said, "For what role?" He said, "The lead." I said, "No, no, 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 no. The lead is like my age. It's like at that time I would have been 40 or 41."
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh, do me a favor. Don't send it to him because I don't want him. I don't want to insult the guy. I'm such a huge fan and such an admirer of his acting, his directing, his incredible leadership in the world of independent film with Sundance and such." I said, "Please don't put me in a position where I'm going to hurt this man, hurt his feelings." And this guy said, "No, no, he's read it. He wants to do it." And show you how dumb I am. My first reaction was, "Oh shit." And I went home that night. It was probably 3 in the morning when I went home, and I'd had a bunch to drink. I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I thought, huh. And I sat up and I reread the script that night, probably 3:30 in the morning, picturing Redford in the role. And it was the best version of the movie I'd ever imagined. Everything got better. It was more serious. It was funnier. It was more poignant. It was more emotional. It was more exciting. Everything about it got better. And the next morning, I called Walter and Larry. They loved the idea. And then I had to call Tom Pollock, who was chairman of Universal Pictures, where Bob had just made Havana, which was, let us be honest, a financial disappointment of gargantuan proportions.
Right.
Someone had told me at the time that the difference between what that movie cost and what it earned was the greatest gap in modern times. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that was the rep at the time. This was the biggest flop. And so the idea of pitching Universal the next Robert Redford film was daunting. And I called Tom Pollock's office, and his secretary said, "Oh, he'll call you back." I said, "No, no, I have to talk to him right now." And she said, "He's in a meeting with Mr. Wasserman and Mr. Scheinberg." I said, "Can you just pass him a note?" And she said, "Oh, he doesn't like when I pass him a note." I said, "Tell him I need 10 seconds that will change his life." Because I'm thinking I've got to pump this up. So she said, "Okay." And a minute later, he gets on the phone. He goes, "What?" I said, "Sneakers, Redford." He said, "Wow, you want to send it to him?" I said, "He wants to do it." And there's a pause, and Tom said, "Ah, interesting. All right, I'll call you back." And he then got into a negotiation with Mike Ovitz, who represented Bob, and that went on for a while. And we heard it closed. So I got to go meet Robert Redford. I go to his office in Santa Monica. He's a great handshake. He's incredibly handsome and charming. And we sit down, and the first thing he tells me is, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with breaking into places. I said, "Like what?" He said, "You know the Fox Theater in Westwood? Now, the Fox Theater was one of the premier first-run movie theaters. And it had a tower, a large tower with lights that spelled out FOX, one letter above each other." He said, "When I was in high school, my friends and I figured out how to sneak into that tower and get up the tower. And we turned out some of the lights at the top of the O, so it spelled out FUX. And for a couple of days, that thing." And I said, "Oh, yes, you're a sneaker." He said, "Yeah, I'm a sneaker." And of course, he'd already done 3 Days of the Condor, one of my all-time favorite
Yeah.
movies.
Hmm.
And, he said, "I'm in. I want to do this." Um, at that point, it became very easy to get the rest of the cast. I knew Sidney a little bit, and I sent it to him, and he read it, and he said, "I'm in." I knew Danny a little bit, sent it to him. And this is a great story. Aykroyd, I was in New York for some casting, and I went to see him. And he said, "Oh man, I love this script. I'm so thankful you want me to be in it. I will be a great Cosmo." And I said, "No, no, 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 I want you to play Mother." He said, "No, no, 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 you got to let me play Cosmo." I said, "Danny, I'm already out to someone for Cosmo." "I don't care who you're out to. I've been spending time with Jerry Garcia, and I've got this whole character based on Jerry Garcia as Cosmo." And I said, "That sounds interesting, but I'm already out to another actor." He says, "I don't care who it is. You got to let me play it." I said, "I'm out to Ben Kingsley." He said, "Okay, I'll play Mother."
Smart. Yeah. And I mean, having made Ghostbusters, he knows the importance of an ensemble that's, well organized. So,
And when you think about it, Danny was a Blues Brother. He was a Ghostbuster. He's a sneaker. He's been in a bunch of team movies, and he really is the epitome of a team player. Certainly, the Not Ready for Primetime Players on SNL is one of his greatest. He's like a great baseball team as a utility man, a guy who can play any position,
hmm.
and that's Danny.
Yeah, because I was curious when you were casting, and obviously that wasn't the case, if if you are making a movie in 2024 and you start pitching, okay, you're going to be like a hacker, everyone goes, "Yeah, got it, no problem." But at that time period, that's a little more of an ask, and people don't necessarily know what that even means.
Interesting you bring that up. We never used the word hacker.
Mm-hmm.
The word hacker, I don't think, appears in the movie at all. Because early on, as we were doing our research, we realized sneakers are not hackers. It's a whole different
Mm.
sort of subspecies of people or genre of stories. Um, and we were very careful. I think probably Carl could qualify as a hacker, uh, but the rest of the team have the skills. We talked to a lot of people about what skills do you need in a team. You need someone who's good with cryptography, codes. We need somebody who's a physical guy who can break in. You need someone who knows about social engineering, which is what most of the movie really is about.
Mm-hmm.
And hacking is sort of one of the one of the last things they think about. There's a whole other range of skills that are needed by these teams.
Yeah.
So actually, when we were sending the script around, I think people just got caught up mostly in this is going to be fun to do. I think even Bob, I think on some level, and I never asked him about this, but I think that he really, and I know Sydney felt this, was looking forward to an experience where the whole weight of the movie is not on my shoulders. I'm part of a team. We're gonna have some fun doing this, but also it's a team. Um, and I think that was attractive to them.
I was going to ask another couple of questions about casting, but you've prompted something in my mind talking about Robert Redford and having that meeting with him because. I mean, I've not directed or written anything that's been made into a film. I can't put myself in your shoes necessarily, but I must think that going to someone of Robert Redford's stature with something that you've spent so much time working on and feel that he gets it
Mhm.
must be very gratifying as a creative.
Hugely. I mean, there's no bigger target for us at that time than Robert Redford. There's no one else who would have meant as much to us, just as writers,
Hmm.
much less as thinking about what the audience. I mean, Redford is a huge star, but because of who he is and the nature of the work that he's done, he's a really smart guy who's a discerning artist who picks stuff very, very carefully uh, because they all mean certain things to him. That just felt great. It just felt great, as it did with Sydney, who I think I admire as much as anybody I've ever met in my life. Um, he was semi-retired at the time. He had pretty much walked away from feature films. And he read this and he said, this is the most entertaining thing I've read in a long time. I want to do this.
Yeah, and it's fun because he did a spy movie with River Phoenix a few years earlier
That's right.
called Little Nikita. Yeah, so it was a fun little
That's
reunion.
right. And when I called River to tell him that, because I had met River, I'd actually met with River on another film earlier that he reminded me of when we met on this. And he said, "How come you didn't cast me in that?" I said, "Honestly, you were humorless." He said, "Yeah, I was pretty humorless then." He said, "I was very serious." So he signed on. And then I called him. He was back in Florida with his parents. And I called him a few weeks later to say, "Hey, guess who's going to play Crease?" He said, "Who?" I said, "Sidney Poitier." And I heard the phone drop and I heard him yell, "Mom, Mom, Sidney Poitier is going to play Crease." It was the cutest thing. It was so sweet. He worshiped Sidney. And it was mutual. Sidney was very fond of River and very paternal to him.
Yeah, it's a great relationship in the film.
Mm.
And yeah, I just had like a little fun casting question, which is you also cast a college age Robert Redford and Ben Kingsley in the film.
Yeah.
How difficult was that?
We saw a lot of young actors. And it's hard because you want there to be a certain physicality. It doesn't have to be an exact resemblance. It's got to be someone who looks appropriate for to grow into that person. Um, and then you also have to have somebody who can not just is a good actor, but can actually play some of the qualities that these older actors are bringing to that role. You can't even base it on things they've done in other films. So we had a few days of rehearsal, and uh, I had the four of them, young Bishop, old Bishop, young Cosmo, older Cosmo. I brought them all in ostensibly to rehearse the scenes, and instead we just sat there and told stories. Ben and Bob were just telling stories about their lives, about their careers, about acting, and these kids were just it was just I'll bet they'll both say it's still one of the most memorable days of their lives. They got to sit and listen to these two tremendous actors talk about their craft, and along the way pick up qualities, pick up some of the things that they bring to a role and what they would bring to the role. Uh, so I think that was hugely valuable. But you're right, it's hard. It's like you don't want to be too on the nose and get somebody who's not the best actor for it, but you don't want to get someone who's a brilliant actor who doesn't look like they could possibly grow into this man. So it's a tough balance.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a reveal with the Ben Kingsley one because when he shows up in the movie, like around the halfway point or whatever it is, it's kind of a surprise.
Mm,
And so it helps because the Robert Redford one, yes, you kind of have a pretty close approximation where you go, okay, yep, that does look a bit like him.
right.
Whereas the Kingsley one, you get kind of the fun of the reveal as well.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are people who knew that Cosmo was going to come back into the story. And we did a little bit of sleight of hand at the parties suggesting that he was killed in prison, and the NSA guys, when they convinced Redford to take the job, they say to him, "We all know what happened to Cosmo in prison." So we're setting up, oh, he was killed there. We once had, I think we once in an earlier draft elongated all that and told the story of what had happened and that he was smuggled out, that they faked a death, they killed somebody else, they smuggled him out in the bottom of the coffin, and that's how he got out. We took that out because it just wasn't necessary. But yeah, it's a nice surprise when he shows up. I think it's this wonderful boost of energy. It's not unlike what I discovered in Field of Dreams when James Earl Jones shows up. There's this great boost of energy when a character that you really, an actor that you love, playing a character who's got some weight behind it, shows up. It's like just at the point where your blood sugar's starting to go down from the candy and the coke you had at the beginning of the movie. It picks you up. It's a nice thing.
Or Lancaster, too. Yeah.
And exactly, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt the discussion, gents, but I have some breaking news. To celebrate the festive season, we are giving away another copy of John Walsh's fantastic book, The Third Man, the official story of the film. To enter, all you have to do is join our Patreon at any of the paid levels before January 31st, 2025. Once you've joined, your name will be put into a hat and the winner will get a signed copy of the book alongside some other Spyhards goodies. Plus, you'll have access to over 100 bonus Spyhards episodes. Sounds like a deal if you ask me. But don't worry, folks, if you're already a member of our Patreon, you'll be automatically entered into the draw. You don't have to do anything at all but sit back and enjoy. So, if you want to get your hands on a copy of this tremendous book, make sure to join our Patreon on any of the paid tiers before the 31st of January 2025. You can find a link to the Patreon in the show notes below or head on over to patreon.com/spyhards. But without further ado, let's get back to your regularly scheduled Spy Jinx. My last question on casting, because Cam actually took one of the ones I had, which is perfectly fine, is again, something that Sneakers is known for is this massive list of characters. All this cast must have been. I mean, we'll talk about maybe corralling them on set later. I think there's some stories we could talk about there. But was there anyone that you just struggled to cast for a while? Was there one that just didn't work for a long period of time?
That's a great question. Let me think about that. I don't recall. My recollection is that the cast came together rather quickly, and I attribute that to, I mean, honestly, I think the script was very appealing to actors, but also I think Redford. Redford being on first
Mm-hmm.
gave it a cachet that's just gold, and actors want to be part of that. To be part of a team with him, as opposed to he's the star and you're kind of got a supporting role. The idea of being part of a team with him, I think, was really attractive to them. I do think it took us a while to land on Cosmo. No, it didn't actually. No, that's not true. It took us a while to meet him. That's right. It was late in the process when I was in New York and Ben flew over to meet. But we had all decided at that point that's our guy. Whistler took a little bit of time because we kept seeing people. People would come into auditions doing stock blind guy. And I would always say to people, don't act. You don't have to come in. We had actors come in like pretending they were blind, which is like right away I'm saying no. Someone who doesn't get what the drill is. But we had a lot of people playing the role like a standard blind, like the way I would. I'm not an actor.
Mm.
We were in New York seeing a lot of actors, and David Strathairn, whose work I knew a little bit, came in, and he read the scene very differently than anybody else had, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I realized, oh, he lives in the world of sound. He wasn't playing blind, he was playing I hear better than anybody else. And so he would just sort of tilt his head a little bit. His vocal mannerisms were slightly exaggerated, the way some blind people, like Stevie Wonder, is great with different voices and things, you know. He played with his voice a lot. And I thought, this is the smartest take I've ever seen on playing blind. He didn't do it with his eyes, he did it with his ears and his voice. And that kind of creativity is just, it's catnip to a director. It's like you want that guy because he's going to come up with great stuff. He was very, very studious about getting it right. He spent some time at a school for the blind to observe and to ask questions. And when he came to work, we were on a huge soundstage at Universal in Hollywood, and he spent a lot of time walking that set with his eyes closed. So he knew what a blind person would know, which is exactly how many steps it is from this point to that point, from that point over to this point. He learned that set perfectly so that he could walk like a confident blind person. When we got to Mary McDonald's apartment, he didn't do that because Whistler had never been there.
Mm.
So that's the one time when you see him kind of fumbling around, having to touch things all along the way to get to the bench where his keyboard is set up. I thought, man, this guy's smart.
I think that that time spent paid dividends because Whistler is one of the characters that I think has stood the test of time since Sneakers has come out. Like there's memorable visuals with Whistler, ironically, but
Yeah.
I think that performance is just one for the ages, especially for like people who have trouble with sight and things like that. It is nice to see that as a fully able, capable person achieving something and doing great work, maybe naughty work, but great work.
Yeah, he's a brilliant actor, and I thought he brought a lot of creativity to understanding the character and figuring out how to portray it. It's one of the things I love when I see the film now is just watching him.
Well, I think we're at the point where, you've assembled this, I mean, a cast for the ages, led by
Mm.
Robert Redford. They've given you everything you wanted. All the green M&Ms are in your
Mm.
contract. You're ready to go. How does it feel now to be taking the reins of Sneakers, directing day one? What's that like? What's that feeling for you? How is it making that transition into this film?
I still had all my doubts that I was the best person for the job. I was nervous about, oh, I'm going into this again. And the night before we started shooting, Redford called me up at home and he said, how you doing? I said, good. He said, you nervous? I said, yeah. He said, don't be. And what more do you want out of life?
Yeah.
Ah,
You know, it was so generous and so thoughtful. And I think that he must have intuited that I needed to hear that from him. He just said, don't be.
It's using experience in all the best ways.
That's right.
Because, you hear about some actors who we won't name, but didn't necessarily have the most patience for directors as they got later in careers. Whereas we've talked to other people who've worked with Robert Redford, and it's so often the case of how supportive he was.
Hmm. He was extremely supportive. I never felt like he was watching me with his director's eye to say, I wouldn't use that lens here. He was an actor who took on a job and was concentrating on his character and what his character would do. Like all actors, he's got, you figure out how best to work with him. And he was pretty wonderful. There's challenges with every actor, and part of the job of the director is to figure out as quickly as possible what I need to do with this actor and with that actor because they all need different things. Um, and he was great, and he's great in the film, and he has a light touch, but there's depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a joy to watch.
we spoke with Michael Frost Beckner a couple of years ago, who wrote Spy Game, the spy film that
Mhm.
Robert Redford did about 10 years later. And it's the same thing.
Mm.
He was nothing but supportive the entire time, offered advice where it was asked, but didn't overstep the line. And that's really, I imagine, all you'd want.
Absolutely. There was one day, it was late in the shoot. We were going over schedule, so I knew that the studio was getting nervous. We were on stage, and who was it? Penny Marshall and Fred Skepsey walked onto the stage to say hi. I knew them both. They came on the stage to say hi. And I thought, huh, they're both directors. Bob's a director. Sydney's a director. I'm going to get a phone call. They need to talk to you in the tower.
Oh,
I thought, this is how it happens.
right.
You know? And of course, none of that was true. It was just they were there to say hi. They were friendly. And we were setting up a shot in the sneakers lair, a long lens shot. So the camera was across this cavernous set from the actors. And we're just about I was just about to say action when I hear Penny behind me say, "Why'd you put the camera over here?" And I got really nervous. I said, well, I wanted to shorten the distance and I started to answer her and I realized, no, I got to shoot this thing. So I really did have this sort of paranoia that they were going to find some other director at some point, but she was just being friendly. That's who Penny was. She would just ask these questions naively. It was kind of her superpower. Friends of mine who've worked with her on other movies said she would pretend that she didn't know a whole lot. I'm just an actress, what do I do? She knew, but it's how she got people to contribute sometimes. And she was charming and funny, and I love her and I miss her.
Yeah, and you talk about the anxieties you had early on directing the film, and yet this is an incredibly visually accomplished film. I think of like the Scrabble tile sequence. I think of the split diopter shots that show up later in the film. These are like swings that could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
They didn't, and the movie looks beautiful. It holds up incredibly well. I was just wondering if you could talk about like the visual design of the movie, because with actors like this, material this strong, you could have just been like, I'm just going to take it easy, let them play for the camera, and the movie may still be great.
That's a discussion that John Lindley and I had, more than one discussion. John had shot Field of Dreams and the film I did before that, so we were pretty comfortable with each other. And I remember saying to him early on, I don't want to feel what I felt on Field of Dreams, which is I'm so overwhelmed that I'm just going to sort of do things simply and not, step on my own tail. And I said, I kind of see this film as the shiny stuff. And he said, okay. And we started talking about how on every film, there's always a moment where you paint yourself in the corner and the only way out is like a bad shot.
Mm.
And he said, let's make a pact, no bad shots. And I said, that's great. And that sounds like a very simple thing, but in fact, truly, on every film, you wind up shooting somewhere where you say, oh, I got to put this guy against a wall because there's no other choice right now and clock's running out. We promised ourselves no bad shots, and that in a way freed me up to think more expressionistically with the camera, to take more chances, because I thought, let's take some chances, let's take the swings, and if it doesn't work, we're going to find some other way out of it without a bad shot. And so there were scenes, I'll give you a great example of this, that nobody will know, but we do. Werner Brandis's apartment, where he has dinner, he cooks dinner for Mary McDonnell.
Yeah.
Well, it's a real apartment in some condo complex in the San Fernando Valley. And we liked it because there was you could sit outside the window and we could see the car go away. So we planned this shot where we're going to be out on a crane and she's going to pass the key to mother who's on a ladder, and we're going to see him take the key and give her the wallet, and the wallet goes back. It's all in one shot from outside the window, and that's why we picked that apartment. Well, then later that night, we had to go inside the apartment for the scene of them sitting around the table, and he demonstrates the talking dog. And we're in there, and we realize there's kind of no good shots in here. Now, we'd scouted this apartment. This was our fault for not having thought about this earlier. But we both went, oh, God, this place is just ugly. And there's kind of no way to make it good. And I said, out of desperation, I said, it'd be cool as if this table, this coffee table, were a light table. There's light coming up from below. And John, without even saying, hey, good idea, he turned to his crew and he said, guys, build a light table. And the grips, the electricians all said, we've got these fluorescent tubes and we've we've got the kind of glass, the smoke glass, and the grips that we've got some two by fours and hammer. And within 45 minutes, they had built a piece of furniture with light coming up through it. And then we shot the scene. Now, it's not beautiful, but it's a hell of a lot better than it would have been. And we both felt like this is the win for the ages. We saved the movie. And in fact, all we did was we saved our sense of pride that we didn't surrender to the bad shot that was sitting in front of us. And that attitude, we had that attitude in every scene. It's like, what do we do here? The sneakers dancing at the party.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen in the script. We got to the party scene, and that morning driving in, I said to John, you know what I realized? We have like 4 days to shoot a party scene. There's no party. There's just people talking. We got to have a party. And we talked about, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I'll just have them dance. Maybe we'll just jump cut them dancing with Mary. It'll be fun. And we got to the set, and I said, what I'd like to do, I said, I'm apologizing in advance. I want to shoot this with deep background. I don't want to put them against a wall. I want to put them here at the bottom of the set and have all the rest of the set behind them with the party lights and people walking around. So you've got to light a whole set for this. And she said, fine. And we locked off the camera. He gave me sort of an area that the dancing could be in. I didn't tell the cast. We had this lit, and I brought the cast in, and I said, guys, you're each going to dance with Mary for, half a minute. And the prop guys had CDs. They had tape cassettes, and I picked Chain of Fools because I thought that was emblematic of the team. And everybody, without too much thought, got up and danced as their character. Sidney did dance steps. He later told me that with the dance steps that he learned for To Sir with Love. Danny is a dancer, so he did like sort of 50s rock and roll dancing. Whistler, David Strathairn danced like a guy who's never seen dancing. I thought that was another brilliant moment for him. And River just did a freak out dance as a crazy kid, which was great.
Yeah.
Bob was not working that morning, so we got all the rest of them. And then I thought, oh, I know what I want to do. When Bob shows up, let's have him slow dance with Mary. And I wrote some dialogue for them. And we took down one of the walls of the set, so they're dancing against the backdrop we had of Oakland at night, all lit up. It was beautiful. It was romantic. It was beautiful. Their dialogue was really cool. And we cut it in. We realized, there goes the party. We had all this energy from people dancing, and it just dissipated with the slow dance. So we cut that part out, left the dancing in. And I love that scene because it's just, John at the last minute figuring out how to light this enormous cavernous set for these dancers, and the actors coming up at the last minute with their own interpretations of how that character would dance.
Yeah, and the character-based element of it is incredible. Like, because that could be a cheap shot in another movie. It's just like, okay, yeah, sure, they're just basically time filler. But here, it tells us about the characters, which is one of the things. You keep saying, the movie was like a shiny kind of movie, but it's like the ambition with the visuals, the attention to character. It may have been kind of a studio kind of package, idea, kind of movie of the time, but the elements were definitely being viewed in a much loftier kind of ideal than they might be with a different film.
And I say credit also goes to Walter and Larry because the three of us were always talking about that as we were writing it.
Mm-hmm.
It was always at the front of our mind it can't just be a very interesting, well-structured plot. It's got to be characters that have some depth and we care about. And the way they solve problems that the plot creates have to be character-based.
Yeah. And if I say, like, name another movie like Sneakers, people go, I don't know if there is another movie like Sneakers.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I suspect there probably are, but nothing jumps to mind. In a funny way, The Sting, that's a lofty, that's a high bar for me. That's one of my favorite all-time movies. The Sting had a lighter tone than most caper films did. And, in addition to the connection with Bob, early in that film, what sets the plot in motion is that Redford's character's friend, the older black man, is murdered.
Yep.
Mm.
That's James Earl Jones's father.
Whoa. I did not know that.
Huh.
Wow.
Well, actually, I had a different question lined up, but you've triggered one I had written down, and that's about James L. Jones. Of course, worked with you on Field of Dreams, and he's at the end of this film. Recently passed away, and I just wanted to sort of put it to you. Could you share maybe a memory of working with him, something about James, really?
He was a wonderful man. He was a very, very warm, honest, decent, good man, and I loved him. He was generous, did not take himself seriously, but he took his job very seriously, and really wanted to get every moment right, and was always willing to kind of poke fun at himself, both in life and as a character. Um, I had we had originally thought, look, the first time we meet this character is over the telephone.
Mhm.
So, and we don't identify who the actor is. It'd be nice if we had somebody with a voice that's distinctive enough so that when you see him at the end of the movie, you go, oh, of course, that's who it is. And we immediately thought of James Earl. I called him up. He was, he had just done a TV pilot. And he said, if the pilot's picked up, I'm not going to be available to shoot the film. So you should get somebody else. So we did talk about other actors. While we were in production, James Earl's wife, Cece, called me and she said, the pilot didn't get picked up. He's going to be available. I said, great, let's do it. And it was wonderful. He worked one day and it was a really fun day. It's like everybody just was on their best behavior because we're working with James Earl Jones, guys. And he was fun. He was big and tough and really funny. And I think that he doesn't get enough credit for how skilled he was at comedy. That guy could really bring it without breaking character. He would always find a way within character to be whatever you needed. And if it was funny, he could find a way to do it that was honest and hilarious.
I think tying a few things together that we've just spoken about with the passion on the set, but also the sort of jovial nature of how that set was. We spoke to Lawrence Lasker earlier on this year about
Oh, great.
Sneakers. So we've had a chat with him too. And one story that always stuck in my head is when he visited the set whilst you were shooting and stumbling upon Dan Aykroyd and doing some interesting things. And that I'll leave that story for people to go and check out. But Dan Aykroyd's a character by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
From your side of things, directing this crew, it sounds like, Stephen Tobolowsky went on record saying it's the best set he ever worked on. There is a lot of love for that team on those 3 to 6 months you shot the film. What was it like corralling these actors? Because it sounds like it might have been a stressful thing.
It wasn't hard. It's like everybody was there for the right reasons. And what was really fun, I mean, I felt like my job is not to stifle the fun that people are having off camera because they're going to bring that on camera. And indeed, River, Danny, and Strathern formed a little team of mischief makers. And they had a secret language all their own.
Hmm.
I never understood what they were talking about. And they had private in jokes. And they'd be doing this until we rolled, and then they're in character. But that sense of camaraderie is like we're the kids, and Bob and Sydney, those are the grown-ups. They maintain that off camera. And there was one night we're shooting the scene where Sydney has come back and said, okay, we're going to lock up and everybody stays here tonight. And because of where the camera was, and he had to make a little move off camera that was very difficult. He had to get around a piece of furniture or something. But I remember it was a complicated piece of movement for him that you don't even see on camera. And in the first take, he does it, and River, Danny, and Strathern break up laughing. They ruined the take. And we all turned, and Sydney his first instinct is, what are you doing? And they all said, oh, God. And I remember Strathern saying, Sydney, I'm so sorry, but we just couldn't believe that you made that move. We were making bets that you would never be able to get back on camera. And they said, we're really sorry. And he said, all right. And then we all got it. But they had there was a little click, the three of them, and they called each other Mr. Roach.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Okay.
And at one point, it evolved into Mr. Woach. I never understood the genesis of all that. But River was outside the stage one day throwing a frisbee around, a football, and one of the Universal security guards said to him, "You can't throw a football around out here." And River said, "Yeah, it's okay." And they kept throwing the football, and the guy arrested him.
What?
We had to call the we had to call the Universal police to say, "Please let him go. He's one of our actors."
Well,
Uh,
that actually does lead me on to a bit of a rumor about this film, and that is that you were visited by people claiming to be from the Office of Naval Intelligence about some of the tech you were using on the film, and there is allegations that they may have not been officers of naval intelligence, and they may have been put up by the cast. I just want to ask you about your experience with that.
I had a call. I got home one night from the shoot. There was a message on my answering machine from an admiral at the Office of Naval Intelligence, and could you please call me tomorrow? And I called the guy, and he said, "Thank you for calling back. Listen, it's not a big deal. We monitor productions that have to do with technology, and you've got a reference in your script to something that we would love to talk to you about. Maybe you can change a little bit for us." And I said, "Can you tell me what it is?" And I said, "I can't do it on the phone, but I'll have two of my guys come out and talk to you." I said, "Well, I'm shooting the movie." He said, "Well, do you take lunch?" Yeah. I said, "All right, so tomorrow at lunch, 1 o'clock, I'll leave your drive-on pass." And the next morning, I called the head of legal for the studio, a wonderful guy named Fred Bernstein. And I said, "Fred, I'm being visited today by these two. I think you should be at this meeting." He said, "Okay." So 1 o'clock, we're shooting that morning. We break for lunch. I go to my office, which was on the lot. Fred comes down. These three guys show up. I thought it was going to be two. It was three guys. They show badges. And at first, it's all very friendly. "Hey, we love Field of Dreams. My mom's from Iowa. I love Field of Dreams." And then they say, "Look, you have a reference in the script to a small box that can decrypt anything. And we really need you to take that out of the movie. Don't refer to that." And I said, "Well, guys, I've shot half the movie. And the movie's about that. I can't take it out." And they stood up, and one guy said, "You will remove all references to that box, or the Attorney General will shut down this film. Good day." And they left. And it was very believable. And Fred looks at me, and he was like sputtering. He said, "What? What?" I said, "They can't shut down a movie, can they?" He said, "I've never heard of anything like that." I said, "Look, I got to go back and shoot. Lunch hour's over. So this is now your problem." And I went back to the set. 5 minutes later, Tom Pollock is calling me. This is before cell phones, so I have to go to a payphone or some phone in somebody's office. And he said, "Fred just told me about this thing where they're going to shut down the film. What is?" And as he's saying, I said, "Redford." He said, "What?" I said, "Redford's been telling me, regaling me with stories of very ambitious practical jokes that he and Paul Newman used to play on each other, and he and other people have played on each other." I said, "This has got all the earmarks of a Redford practical joke." And Tom said, "All right, we're going to get this guy back." I said, "No, we're not. I'm not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for when Bob figures out a payback." I said, "Let him have his joke." And so I go back to the set, and I said, "Bob, very funny." He said, "What?" I said, "The Office of Naval Intelligence." He said, "What?" I said, "The three guys, they came, they said he said, "They're shutting the film down? What?" I said, "No, Bob, come on, I know it's you." He says, I swear it. I don't know anything, what you're talking about." So we're shooting, and I thought, "Oh, it's Danny. Danny has a lot of friends in law enforcement, and these guys seemed real something."
Yeah.
So I went over to Danny and said, "Danny, very funny. What? Office of Naval Intelligence. What are you talking about?" He says, "Hey, I wish I could think of something that clever." I said, "It wasn't me, I promise." To this day, no one has taken credit for this.
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to reveal it today, but I know who did it. It was a member of the cast.
Okay.
I've pieced together a couple of disparate pieces of information. But what I really admire is that nobody to this day has taken credit for this.
Wow.
God bless them. That's a good practical joke.
That's like the best practical joke. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And it was very believable. I'll tell you, these guys were not clowns. They may have been real law enforcement something, you know.
Yeah.
Well, they sent the head of legal into a tizzy, so that's obviously got to mean they sounded like they meant business at least anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
I want to talk about something that's very important to me when it comes to sneakers, and that is James Horner.
yeah.
Field of Dreams, Star Trek 2 and 3, Rocketeer, many great scores to that man's name. And I mean, I actually rewatched Field of Dreams the other day as well to sort of prepare for this. And I actually had forgotten how great the score to that film is until I went back and sat through it and how subtle it is.
It's brilliant.
But I've actually listened to it since then just on my iPhone. But obviously bringing it back in for sneakers, how did that come to pass, and what was it like working with him again?
We had a great experience on Field of Dreams. I, you make a temp score when you're cutting the film. You take music from other movies usually and just cut it in to see how the scenes work. And I didn't do that on Field of Dreams. I used music that was not from movies. I used music from uh, sort of atmospheric things. Windham Hill was a label that did a lot of atmospheric music. I did a lot of new age kind of very subtle stuff. The studio hated the temp score. But James understood, he loved it. He understood what I was trying to do. And he said, I know what you want, and I'm going to do that. And he did it in a very unique way. He didn't write everything out. We went into a studio with just a couple of soloists and some programmers, and he would, as he called it, paint. He would just take each scene and add a color, take a little color out, add a little thing, and we'd finish that scene, go to the next scene. So he was creating the score in the studio until the last reel of the film, which is a full orchestra. And that was fully orchestrated, based on the themes that he had done earlier. So he had a great time. That was a very untraditional way of working, and he really enjoyed the challenge and the fact that I trusted him to come up with that. So on Sneakers, again, I didn't do a traditional temp score. I took music from Steve Reich, Philip Glass, John Adams, the sort of contemporary so-called minimalist composers, because I thought they had a mathematical, technological quality to them. And James loved that. It's not something he had done before. So again, he loved the challenge of it. And he said, I want to do that. And I thought he wrote a great score for Sneakers and a very, for him, unusual. I remember the first day of scoring, we're playing the main theme, and Walter, who was a musician, Walter Parks, turned to me and he said, James wrote a riff. I said, I don't think James has ever written a riff before. It was a very hip score. We got Branford Marsalis to play the soprano saxophone. It was like fantastic. It was a tremendous score with elements that became signature elements of his in later scores. But I think they were pretty original to Sneakers. I think that there were a lot of these things, those sort of very busy piano sort of attack things, and I think that stuff started with Sneakers for him. So again, I think he loved the challenge of doing something he hadn't done before and the freedom to really explore.
Well, I think it's also, I said for me when going back to Field of Dreams, the sort of subtle nature of the score really stood out to me. Like, for Sneakers, listening to it and also watching the film again recently, is the playfulness that came out to me. That it's not, again, it's not brassy or orchestral. It's not like Star Trek 2, for instance. It's not wah in your face. It is far more subtle, but also lighter and more playful than Field of Dreams. So there's definitely something unique about the Sneakers score that if you've not paid attention to it, and listeners are going to revisit it after this, pay attention to the score because there's some great work in there.
It's interesting you mentioned the playfulness because that's key to the movie we were making. But he did something else too. He captured the melancholy of the relationship between Cosmo and Bishop. Because if you look at Cosmo's story, it's a story of a guy who wants his friend back. And the whole plot is based on he puts this scheme together to get his friend back. He wants Bishop to join him in finishing what they started out to do. And there's a real melancholy to that. And James captured that. I love, those are some of my favorite. I love the playful riff stuff, but I also really love those scenes between Cosmo and Bishop because they're very tender, and it speaks to sort of this love and this need that Cosmo has. Ben Kingsley said to me one day, Bishop is my emotional circuitry. Without him, I'm dead. I need him. And I thought that was a lovely thought for an actor, and James found that. Something else he did, which I just marvel at to this day, um, the scene of Whistler driving the car.
Hmm.
It's sort of an action scene. It's this car is bouncing around, it's crashing into other cars, it knocks a tree down, it goes down a hill, it smashes into a wall. He didn't score it like an action scene. He scored it like, from Whistler's point of view, I'm flying. I'm driving a car. That's the score for that scene is this beautiful, exciting freedom that Whistler is feeling. And I thought, man, that's really brilliant because we attempted with something that was more just sort of stock exciting. He would always try to think, well, what's that character going through at that moment? And that's what I think a great score should always be doing. It should never be telling us what to feel about a scene. It should be underlining what the character is feeling about that moment. And he intuitively knew that, and he was pretty brilliant. It's a tremendous loss, uh, his loss.
Yeah.
My music shelf, as far as soundtracks go, has a large James Horner component, and so I had to take the opportunity to ask because I won't get to speak to many people that got to work with him, and his music means a lot to me. So yeah,
Yeah. And you know, the first time I met him, I just realized this. The first time I met James, Walter Parks had a Christmas party years before because James had scored Project X, which Walter and Larry produced. And that's the first time I met James and liked him and made a mental note. It'd be fun someday to work with this guy.
I had another question about the third act, and I was curious if Brian De Palma ever sent you a check for reusing the entire third act in the Langley sequence in Mission Impossible in 1996.
No, but you know, I don't look at it that way. I mean,
I know.
we all steal. I mean, I don't know if he stole. I think what he did was original and thrilling and creative, and it was fine. And you know, here's a sneakers theft story. When we were writing the scene, Redford's in the trunk of a car, and we knew, okay, so he's going to hear something that's going to give them the clue to where they are. We couldn't figure out. We figured out, okay, the bridge, you know, the railroad tracks, but there's got to be something. And Larry said, I know. He thinks he hears a cocktail party,
Mm.
but really, it's a pond full of geese. We thought, well, that's pretty interesting. What made you think of that? And he said, well, I remember when I was a kid hearing a radio drama. This was some obscure radio drama in which someone heard what they thought was a cocktail party. It was a pond full of geese. And so we said, all right, well, but we don't want to take something that someone else wrote. He goes, I promise you, no one knows that story. It's like, I've never heard of it since. It's fine. So we allowed ourselves to be talked into, because we couldn't think of anything better, this. At the premiere, which was at the Academy, there's a very grateful audience afterwards who were, you know, congratulating us. And I see Larry in the corner laughing. He's talking to some woman. He's laughing. He's waving me over. And he says, this is Phil. Tell Phil what you just said to me. She said, I want to thank you for the homage to Grandpa. I said, who's Grandpa? She said, Philip Dunn. Now, Philip Dunn was one of the great screenwriters of the golden age of Hollywood. I said, what was the homage? She said, well, from his famous radio drama with the geese pond that was the... I said, Larry, you told us it was some obscure thing. Philip Dunn wrote this thing. And when I was in England, we opened the film, it was in London. I did an interview at the BBC, and the guy said, so I want to talk to you about, you know, your plagiarism of Philip Dunn. I said, no, it was homage.
In that case, it's clearly a history here, so it all makes sense that it was just sort of iterated upon later by Brian in Mission.
You know, it's all grist for the mill.
There you go.
And by the way, before we wrote a word, we watched every caper film we could find. We watched Top Cappy and The Hot Rock and Rififi and there was a lengthy list of really fun films. And I'm sure that if I went back and looked at those, I would find things that we stole from those films.
Right. I mean, the heist filmmaking in this is exceptional, and it has to work like clockwork to really grab an audience. And was that something that was really difficult to make happen, or you're looking at the influences? Was it pretty heavily storyboarded out, so you didn't necessarily have a lot of concern by the time you were shooting it?
We didn't storyboard. I don't remember storyboarding anything,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Well, we may have. Usually I would storyboard, like if there was a big effects sequence. We might have storyboarded the van.
Okay.
It was the van, I'm not sure. Um, but I had spent some time talking because I felt nervous about, I'd never done action stuff, and there isn't a lot of action in the film, but there's some. So I sat down with John Badham, who's a friend and who's done some wonderful action films and is really, really skilled at it. And I said, I'm just nervous about this stuff. He said, Phil, you will have a second unit director and a stunt coordinator. When you want to set up an action scene, you tell him what you want to see, and then you sit in a big chair with a cup of coffee and you watch it unfold. He said, it's very pleasant. And so, and we had very good people, and I would just try to be as specific as I could in telling them what I wanted and adjust it where I felt I needed to. But basically, action people know what they're doing, and you turn them loose. I did, to my detriment, shy away from some action. Uh, when they break out of Playtronics, there's nobody chasing them. That was cowardly of me. I should have had
Mm.
a little more. We did shoot some, we cut it out because it just wasn't much. I should have had a little more there. But honestly, action isn't what the movie is about. It's not what it's not the most important thing for it to deliver. Uh, so I don't feel too bad about that. But if I had it to do again, I think I would probably push a little more for honest action and jeopardy.
Right.
And we spoke about this briefly towards the beginning of this discussion, but I wanted to touch back on the tech, which is kind of part of what this whole film is about. And I mean, not only is the film graceful in the way it's able to break down the technology for people who didn't understand sneaking or freaking or any of the things that happen in this film, black hats, etc., to an audience in 1992 in a way that's completely digestible. But also, the film manages to be completely relevant in 2024. Now, the tech might look outdated, but the thoughts behind it and the sort of plans and the schemes behind some of it is just relevant now. And I think it's I mean, credit to you and the rest of the team, but just reflecting maybe upon it a little bit, like you cracked it. How did you manage to pull off such a feat?
Well, there's two aspects to that. One is thematically about the idea that we're relevant today, and the other is about the technology. The
Mm.
relevance today is because early in our discussions, as we were meeting with and interviewing, scientists and whatnot, we kept realizing this was Walter's phrase, there's a new map of the world. Maps were invented to help people and goods travel. How do you get the trade? How do you get trade to work? Well, they had to have maps for that. We realize that there's a new map, which is about how information travels around the world. And that's going to increasingly define the world that we're moving towards. And so that speech at the end, when Cosmo and Bishop are on the roof of Playtronics, and he says about how the wars aren't fought by weapons anymore, it's little ones and zeros. That was written very late in the process. I think I wrote that during production, actually, shortly before we shot the scene, because we needed some more meat in there.
Mm.
And it's basically the stuff that Walter and Larry and I have been talking about for years while we were writing this, is the world is changing in a very powerful way, and everybody knew it, but they didn't know how it was going to happen. So we got as specific as we could without knowing the future, but we knew little ones and zeros were the new battleground. And so I think that message resonates very strongly today. I don't think we were incredibly prescient to know that. We were a little prescient. A lot of people knew that when we were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a film had been made about that at the time. But the other half of this issue is the technology that we showed and that the sneakers use. And the key to it for us was they can't use the latest, greatest gadgets because in 2 years, those are going to look outdated.
Mm-hmm.
These have to be, this was our mantra, these are low-tech guys in a high-tech world. And so you watch the film today and you don't go, oh, that's cornball, because they're not using, what they kick a door down and they figure out you know, how to figure out someone's password. It's not about the latest gadgets. And I think that saved us. I don't think we knew to the extent how much it would save us, but it really did. It was the two mantras we had were cool guys doing cool stuff and low tech guys in a high tech world.
And you yourself were wandering into the tech world yourself with like appearing on CompuServe and talking to people at the time as well. Like the marketing for this movie
Yeah.
also was way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I was an early adapter. Um, I had my first computer in the early 80s. And Walter and Larry, after War Games came out, Apple invited them to come up to their campus and talk. And Apple gave them each a Mac, and so they came back with these beautiful new computers. So we were all kind of like into it. And I loved CompuServe. This is like, I think predates AOL, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it was far better. It was great. And they had special interest, they didn't call them chat rooms, they called them CB channels, I think. Um, and I spent a lot of time on CompuServe. I found it really interesting to see where you could start to explore. It's before the World Wide Web, obviously.
Mhm.
And when the film came out, we had talked to the Universal marketing people, and they wanted to do something kind of cool. And they released the press kit on a floppy disk, and it had some encryption on it. It was very easy to figure out, but you had to crack the code to get the information on the press kit. And they made a deal with CompuServe to give us a channel where people could post questions and we would answer them. And I remember when that went live, the very first day, users on CompuServe were furious. What is this commercial enterprise doing on in our playground? We had to explain, well, this is something new that, get used to it. But this is like, we're here to kind of like, for you to have fun. You could ask questions. And then they really got into it, and people really enjoyed it. And we did a live chat session one night that was hilarious. Because it was so new, the idea of being able to ask questions of filmmakers was very new to them. Now it's kind of de rigueur. You can find very ambitious things online for various movies. But this was, I think, the first time anybody had done that sort of thing, and it was kind of fun to see.
Yeah.
It's well, I mean, yeah, it's sort of par for the course now when it comes to marketing films. The people will do podcasts like this, or they'll do Ask Reddits and things like that. All kinds of interactive YouTube videos, things like that. Um, I suppose my last question about sneakers, because I want to get us onto Sum of All Fears for a little bit as well, is we've spent over this last year, we've spoken about sneakers 3 times. We're trying to promote the film ourselves because we think people should be checking it out. And it has achieved, to me, a cult status as a film.
Hmm.
How do you feel about that as a piece of your work that has gone on to have a life past it being released, and it's praised certainly by us? I don't know if that means anything, but it does to me. But how do you feel about the fact that the sneakers has gone on to have a life of its own over the last sort of 30 years?
I love it. I mean, it makes me feel wonderful. And I think Walter and Larry share this too. We set out to do something, you're not thinking about 30 years later when you're making a film. You're thinking about, can we get into the marketplace? Can we break through the noise? Can we have something that's modestly successful enough so that we get to have another job?
Mhm.
You cannot do anything to affect the long tail,
Mhm.
except do your best and hope for the best. It's very gratifying. I'm a little surprised just because it's really a film of its time. But again, we were thinking about not the future of the film, but the future of technology and how it would affect our world. So I suppose it's somewhat understandable. But I think also just entertainment is entertaining, and it's like we tried never to lose sight of being entertaining and rewarding the audience for investing in these characters and in the story and showing people a good time and making them think a little bit. Um, so it's a wonderful feeling. I will say, from time to time, I'll see the most frequent comment I'll see is, uh, "Boy, this is an underrated, forgotten movie." It, it's not. It can't be underrated or forgotten if everybody's saying this.
Yeah.
It's like it's underrated or forgotten when people say, "What? Never heard of it." But you hear a lot of people saying, "Wow, I love this. I love this film," and it may not be as famous as other films of its time, and I'm sure there are people who are unaware of it, but I think it's got a pretty loyal, rather large following. The perception is that it's forgotten and underrated, but I'm not sure it is.
I mean, judging from the amount of people telling us to cover it, I would say it does have a pretty vocal fan base out there, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and I must say, in my travels, when it, I'm always happy when people praise Field of Dreams. I'm very proud of it, but I'm especially happy when they praise Sneakers,
Mm.
because it's easier to love Field of Dreams in a way. It's so emotional and so emotionally satisfying to so many people. Um, I love it when people say, "Oh, I got to talk to you about Sneakers."
Right. Yeah, we interview a number of people that work on, say, Bond films. And when you ask them about something they did outside of Bond, you see them just like light up, and it's like, that's right. That was an amazing project I got to do. Yeah.
And yet, to work on a Bond film would be fantastic.
Well, of course.
I mean, for many people, that would be the culmination of a career. That's just um, what a legacy those films are.
Mm-hmm.
Still many more to go, I'd hope. And I might just come back to Bond at the end of this discussion. But speaking of other films you've done, about 10 years later, you joined the Tom Clancy verse, as it were, the Jack Ryan films, and Sum of All Fears, the fourth Jack Ryan film. How did you sort of make that transition into the Sum of All Fears? How did that one come across your desk?
Without any intention on my part, my agent called me one morning and he said, "Philip Noyce just dropped out of the new Tom Clancy film. And they want to meet with you." I said, "That's not possible." And he said, "No, no, Paramount wants to have a meeting." I said, "They're not going to hire me to do a Tom Clancy film. It's ridiculous."
Hmm.
It's like, and by the way, I love the three preceding Tom Clancy films. I just love them.
Yeah.
My kind of movie. It's like, as a moviegoer. And he said, "No, they want to meet with you." I said, "Do me a favor. Call Mace Neufeld had produced all the Tom Clancy films." I said, "Call Mace and see if this is just a courtesy meeting. If it is, they don't have to. Let's not waste their time or my time." I mean, it really seemed preposterous to me that anybody would hire me to do that. I never done anything like it. Even Sneakers was nothing compared to the kind of adrenaline charging film that the Clancy films are. So he called me back later and he says, "No, no, Mace says they want to meet with you." Now, I don't know if he ever talked to Mace or not, but so I went in to meet with Mace and John Goldwyn, who was then president of Paramount. And on the way in, I knew I can't go in talking to them about action and visual effects and stuff because I don't know anything about it. So I just went in and talked about character. And I said, there's a moment in the first Clancy film when Alec Baldwin is hanging from a helicopter in a storm in the North Atlantic, being slammed up against the conning tower of a submarine. And he says, "I should have written a report." I said, "That's the guy. I want to make a movie about that guy."
Mm-hmm.
They lit up. And they said, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, "Yeah, that guy's in over his head." I love Harrison's portrayal, but with each film and moving up to Sum of All Fears, he's moving up in the bureaucracy. I think in Sum of All Fears in the book, he's like deputy director of the CIA or something very important like that. I said, "I'm not as interested in that guy as I am in the guy who is thinking, shit, I should have written a report." And I said, I imagined that, when he's taken to Russia to go do this nuclear inspection, he has to break a date with his girlfriend, and he calls her from the plane and says, "Look, I'm in the CIA, and I did this." And she goes, "Oh, that's so lame," and she hangs up on him. And they laughed. And I got home. By the time I got home, my agent was calling me and saying, "I don't know what you said to them, but home run. They want you to do this." And you come in tomorrow and meet with Sherry. Sherry Lansing was chairman of the studio, and I met with her. And I remember walking in her office. I said, "Are you nuts? Do you want the nice, gentle Tom Clancy film where people say that was so sweet?" And she laughed. She says, "No, I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want action sequel number 27. I want this to be smart, and I want it to be funny, and I want it to be about the politics and about the characters." I said, "If you mean that, I would love to do this." She said, "I mean it." I said, "Okay." She said, "Look, Harrison and Noyce have dropped out. We want to offer this to Ben Affleck." I said, "Great idea. Guy in over his head. He'll hit this out of the park." She said, "Go to New York, meet with Ben. If he likes you, you're doing the movie." And so the next day I flew to New York and I met with Ben. It's impossible not to like Ben. He's just the nicest, coolest guy in the world. We had a great talk. We talked about what we wanted the film to be. And I remember saying to him, "You can't be thinking about how would Harrison or Alec play the role, and I can't be looking over my shoulder at how would Philip Noyce be directing this. Um, we're not doing number four, we're doing number one of a new series." And he said, "That's exactly how I want to look at it." And so, a few days later, I was on a plane to Montreal to scout locations. It happened very, very quickly.
Sort of the polar opposite from Sneakers in that sense. 10-year gestation period
Very,
and 10-second gestation period.
absolutely right. And by the way, the once Harrison dropped out, they brought on a wonderful writer named Dan Pine to rewrite the film for the younger actor. It was a big rewrite. Um, and I was working on, we sort of divvied up. I said to him, "Do you mind if I take some of the few of these scenes?" He says, "No, please." So I said, "I'd like to write this scene, you write that." And we sort of divvied up the work and then would send pages back and forth. So while I was prepping, I was working with Dan on the script, and he was wonderful. And I think we got it in pretty good shape. And Ben was very happy with the changes, and the studio was happy. And we were shooting before I knew it. I mean, I I remember in December, I think I signed on in September, and in December, I remember calling John Lindley, who was going to shoot this too, and I said, "I think we should be in Montreal." I said, I'm getting phone calls from the prep team that they're floundering a little bit, and I hate to say it, but I think we got to go there now." And so, 2 months after being hired, I was in Montreal. We were prepping, and we started shooting a few months after that. So it was fast.
Wow. Wow. And is Tom Clancy like involved at all? Like, or is he kind of yes, it's his book, but at this point in his career, if they're making another movie, sure thing. But does he look at the script at all?
Oh yeah.
Oh, he does. Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Okay.
oh yeah. Now, when I got hired, I said to Sherry, "I want to call Tom Clancy." She says, "Do not call Tom Clancy. Do not ever call him." She says, "He hates the script. He hates the production. He hates us. He hates the producer. He's so angry about something that we don't even know about. Apparently, he felt slighted at the premiere of some previous film. And I never found out what the story was, but he felt dissed. And so he was very down on all these people. And she said, "He hates the script. Don't talk to him." And I felt bad. Oh, all right. I was about 2 weeks into shooting when Sherry called me one night at my apartment in Montreal, and she said, "Sweetie, Tom Clancy really hates the script. I told him you'd call him. Here's his number." So I said, "Okay." So I called him up, and he said, "Yeah, yeah, thanks for calling. Listen, there's a lot of shit in this script you got to change." And I said, "Well, we're already started shooting, so there's a limit to what I can change, but I'd love to get your notes." And apparently no one had ever said that to him on this film. And he said, "You mean that?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to see your notes." He said, "Okay, I wrote a memo. I'll send it to you. Give me your email address." I give it to him. We hang up. A minute later, my laptop has smoke coming out of it because of his email, which I won't quote to you, but it was pretty vulgar,
Mhm.
talking about those of us who had worked on the script and what ignorant so-and-sos we were and how we'll all die broke, and page after page of notes about this is wrong and this is stupid and what idiot wrote this. And I hadn't gotten through half the memo when he called me back and he said, "You get my memo?" I said, "Yeah, I'm reading it now." He said, "Pretty incendiary, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. There's a lot of stuff in here." And I think my saying that's okay made it okay. It's like he just wanted someone to listen to him.
Hmm.
And I said, look, there's things in here I can't change because I've already shot him. There's things in here that I don't agree with and I don't want to change. And there's things that I agree with and I will change. And that's all he wanted. He just wanted someone to listen to him and to engage with him.
Hmm.
And so we began a lengthy series of phone calls. I mean, he would call me frequently at night when I desperately needed sleep during production. He would call, and I never said, I can't talk to you now. I would always talk to him. He was a really interesting guy, a very smart guy, and very opinionated and not afraid to express his opinion in strong terms. But we had a very honest back and forth about what I could change. And I thanked him for the suggestions of things that I thought were good ideas and explained why I wouldn't change the other stuff. And he was great. And I said to him, you got to come to the set. You know, you should. He had met Ben. Ben very smartly, when Ben was offered the job, he said, let me go. Ben called Harrison and Alec to say, is this okay?
Yep.
And then he flew to Baltimore to meet with Clancy. And Clancy loved Ben. He said, I think he's great, and I hope he does more of these because he's really good at this. And I kept telling Tom, you got to come to the set. I think you really enjoy it. And he never came. But we had the premiere in Washington as a benefit for one of his charities. And that's the first time I met him in person, was at the premiere. And he was loaded for bear. He was ready to hate the film, you know. And when the film ended, I sidled over next to him. I said, so? He said, not bad, Phil. And I said, I'm going to take that as the Academy Award.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I said to him, Tom, I have to do a narration track for the DVD. Now, these things are usually love fests where directors talk about how brilliant they are. And I've had this idea and that idea. I said, I'm going to do one of those with the DP, but I want to do one with you where you can say anything you want about the movie. And he said, well, they'll never use that. I said, I promise you they will. It'll be great. Let's just talk and you can criticize everything that you want to criticize. Because I thought, who wouldn't want to hear that, you know? So we went into a recording studio. We put headphones on. They played the film, and I said, "Hi, I'm Phil Robinson. I directed the film." He said, "I'm Tom Clancy. I'm the guy who wrote the book that Phil ignored." And I said, "Well, now wait a second. That's not completely accurate." And then we had it. And I just thought, I'm not going to defend myself. I'm just going to interview the guy. So he would say, "Now this scene is bullshit." And I said, "Really? Why do you say that?" "Well, they wouldn't do this." "No, what would they do?" "They'd do this." And I had a great time with him because I enjoyed that back and forth. If you go online, you'll see people saying, "Oh boy, Robinson walked into a buzzsaw. I didn't know what he was getting into." It was my idea. I knew what I was getting into. I'd spent hours on the phone with this guy, night after night. I knew what he was going to say. But I thought it was kind of fun to hear that point of view. And he enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. And we stayed in touch for a while, and then sadly he passed away. But I liked the guy. I thought he was a really interesting guy who earned the right to be persnickety about this stuff. He created a kind of a genre all his own, and he researched the hell out of stuff. He had sources that were really, really top level and very valuable for a novelist.
I've never heard that track, but I do have the DVD, so I think you might have just sorted out my Friday evening viewing.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's Tom. What's fun is that it's Tom uncensored. It's him just unloading on me.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Well, Scott, in 1978, we believed a man could fly. But in 1980, did we believe a man could fly again? This week, we are going to tackle Superman 2, starring Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman and Margot Kidder. Is this smash hit sequel still a Zod-tier superhero epic? Let's find out.
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/Spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the spy jinx.
But you spoke about Ben Affleck talking to his predecessors. Did you get a chance to speak to either of the two directors that done the previous Jack Ryan films, sort of just to get their thoughts?
I didn't. I got to know Philip Noyce after I did this, and he was very, very nice. And I, looking back, I should have given him a call, but I was so conscious of make this the new one. Make this we're making a clean break. This is not chronologically doesn't make any sense with the previous ones, and I've just got to be true to what this is about. And I also had a sense, and which goes back to my love-hate relationship with directing. This was the first time I was going to direct a screenplay that I had not written. And while I had written some scenes in it, I was not the primary screenwriter. And I remember thinking, okay, you're not directing out of defense now. You're not there to protect your screenplay. You're there to tell a story. And so I felt freer than I'd ever felt. And I thought, okay, this is just work on your chops as a director. Just this is about directing now. And I felt much freer and I felt much more unencumbered with my own fears and anxieties, strangely enough. And I had a much better time directing this than I'd ever had before. I really had fun. You get to play with really big toys, so that's fun. The cast was, to a person, just a thrill and a delight to work with. Everybody in that cast, there wasn't a single person that my heart would sink when they walked on the set. And usually on a film, there's always one, Doesn't have to be a big character, but somebody you go, oh God, they're here. I was thrilled to see everybody every day. And I really enjoyed them and I enjoyed what they brought to it. And I really respected what they brought to it and made friends I still have to this day and really had a good time with that.
I mean, just looking through that list, I could name some of the main characters, but I think like Bridget Moynihan and Ciarán Hinds both do brilliant jobs with their characters. You wouldn't, and they're not the stars by any stretch of the imagination, but they really just inhabit those characters and don't draw away from the main story too much, but they're there and you actually buy them.
And Kieran had to learn Russian in a week or two. He had to learn his dialogue in Russian.
That's great.
And he's really good. He worked very hard on that and was wonderful. He was really wonderful. It's interesting that if an actor has a capacity for language, they can pick it up quickly, but they can also act in that language. And he does it, and Liev, who has a couple of scenes speaking Ukrainian to the old lady in the hospital. Oh my God, he's every bit as good an actor in Ukrainian as he is in English. It's really impressive to watch how good he is in that.
And you already kind of answered one of the questions I had about it being separated from the continuity in air brackets. This is a line in the sand, a new Jack Ryan, as it were, and it is then reinvented again in the next film and then in the TV series that came afterwards. But you are, I would say, I actually rewatched this the other day. I've had a week of your films at home, so it's been a good week.
Oh, good.
And I think it actually is very successful at actually having its own version of Jack Ryan and introducing him differently to how Alec Baldwin was brought in the first one as well. It stands on its own. So I suppose then my question when it comes to Ben Affleck is, you're directing this actor who, he's doing pretty well at this point, but he's not really had his big moment. He's not Batman by this point. He's still Ben Affleck. And how do you go about directing him into finding a character without aping on the two actors that came before him?
It wasn't any harder than just that initial conversation where I said to him, I'm not going to try to imitate the guys before me, and you can't do it. We've got to think about this as film number one in a new series. And let's just talk about who Jack Ryan is. He's an academic, very smart. He had been in the military, but he's not like a trained killer. And, he's going to get by on his smarts. And there's a couple of scenes where he does a beautiful scene for me in the office when he's talking about, I think, the only way the tanks could come in here, and he's sending us a message that you see him thinking, and that's what Jack Ryan does. He's an analyst, he thinks. And we went to CIA headquarters at Langley, and they took us through. He went separately than I did. I went a different time than he did. But we each had this experience of being taken to the Russia desk, which looks exactly like the office that we recreated in the film. It looks like the Russian department at a medium-sized Midwestern university. You know, it's a bunch of little cubicles and a bunch of desks, and everybody has their nesting dolls and their souvenirs from their trips to Russia on their desks. And in the real Russia desk, we talk to these guys, these analysts. What do you do all day? One guy watches Russian television all day just to take note of who's showing up where. Another guy's reading every Russian magazine or periodical that shows up. They're academics, basically. These are not spies. They're analysts, and they're taking in all this information and trying to just glean something. And I thought we caught a nice glimpse of that in the Russia desk scene when they're looking at the Russian president on TV and someone saying, oh, the guy next to him, or, you know, he was at that meeting. Oh, looks like Zoran put on weight. This might have health consequences. Let's see what. They're just trying to pick little kernels of information out of what's available publicly. And that's a huge amount of what they do. And I thought that Ben really captured the sense of, yeah, I do that. I look for stuff. You know, I'm not a spy, I'm not a spook, I don't break into places, but it's kind of fun. It's a puzzle out there, and I got to find the pieces of the puzzle. And Ben is a really smart guy, so I think he was naturally able to convey that. And then in the action scenes, he's in a fight with the villain at the end, and I'm really proud of that fight because he's you know, he can take care of himself, but he's getting the shit beat out of him. And at one point, he's on the ground, and the guy's coming to him, and he's going, "Wait, wait, wait!" It's like that's what I would do if I was in a fight with anybody. I'd say, "Please stop." You know, he's just not a trained fighter, and I think there's a tendency or you know, when actors kind of want to show that side, there's a tendency to want to kind of be better at fighting than their character would be in real life. And I think he was very confident about that's not what I do. I'm not a fighter. I'm an analyst, and he stuck to that. And I was really, really, really happy with his performance. I thought he did great.
Hmm. I was going to ask about the nuclear bomb
Mm.
going off in Baltimore in the film. Was that ever something that you became nervous about working into the film?
No, this film you cannot have the scene of it's the red wire, the blue wire. It's gonna blow up in five. So you have 5 seconds. Pick one. He picks one. He cuts the right wire. I hate that. Um, and the reason that this film exists, the story exists, is that the hero doesn't save the day.
Mm.
And that's the world we live in now, as we discovered after the film was made. The world we live in, you don't always stop these terrorist attacks. So there was a lot of talk about how are we going to portray the explosion, and to me this was the most interesting challenge because I really didn't know how, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I knew what I didn't want to do before I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just cut wide and have a big blinding flash and a mushroom cloud. It's sort of obvious. It's also a dishonest point of view. If you could see that, you'd be blind or dead.
Yep.
And it risks being pornographic in a way. It's like we're Hollywood. We could make that look incredible.
Yeah.
Where you would say, wow, you got to see this bomb go off. And I did not want that to be the reaction. I wanted people to feel gut punched by it. I wanted them to feel sick to the stomach when it goes off. So, and actually that came to me in a dream. I actually had a dream of being somewhere where a bomb went off. And in the film, I went, oh no, we can't take that back. And when I woke up, I thought, yeah, you should just feel sick about it. So I thought, I was looking at a lot of footage of atomic bomb explosions. The Army and the Department of Energy had made a lot of footage. You've probably seen some of in the Utah desert and the Nevada desert of these A tests. And a blinding flash and a mushroom cloud is not as impressive as the footage that showed the effects of it.
Yeah.
They would show miles away the force, the wave of energy knocking a stand of trees down, knocking houses down. The pictures from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not at ground zero, but of houses reduced to ashes miles away from the heat. That's the stuff that tells you how powerful this is. And I thought, well, that's what we ought to do. I want to show the effect of the bomb on survivors, not on the people who are killed by it. And I thought, well, we've got our main characters who are also the president, the head of the CIA, Ben, then Ben's girlfriend. They all experienced the bomb. Let's follow them when this thing goes off. And then that began a fascinating series of discussions, and we did storyboard a bunch of this of the different ways each would be affected by it. Um, the first moment you get is in the hospital when the nurses are around the nurses station. The Super Bowl is on television, and you hear them saying, "Well, the president just rushed out," and the TV goes off, and the blast blows through the windows a split second later. And then I think it's Ben in the helicopter, and then the president in his motorcade. And each one of those was shot differently because it required different techniques and different effects. So there was a lot of physical effects, there were a lot of visual effects. Ben in the helicopter, he was on stage, a green screen around this helicopter interior that was on a gimbal, a thing that moves around a lot. So he's shaken, fake glass blows through, and then we green screen the real world rushing up behind him. Then we really crashed a helicopter. The scene of the helicopter hitting the ground, we had a helicopter on wires that came hurtling down, tumbles down the hillside. We had an articulated dummy as the pilot. You see him flop through the window. The motorcade, we staged a real motorcade. Each of those cars had the stunt driver in a cage and fire retardant clothing, and each one of them had a button to push that would send like a piston down through the bottom of the car, hit the ground, and flip the car.
Mm-hmm.
And so on cue, each one of those cars flip over, and then the visual effects people added the shock wave and the dust and the trees blowing down. In the hospital, that was actually I staged the shot in our hospital set, and then the visual effects people took every actor and every element, every object in that set to a green screen stage and separately shot them blowing around and then composited it all together. It was a huge amount of work. But it was a fascinating process. But each of those things required a different set of techniques, but each is focused on our characters. And I thought that was the most effective way to show this explosion. And we have very little of you see the mushroom cloud in distance. We have very little of the real up close horror of it. And I think it's one of the reasons that the film works is that we don't rub your nose in gore.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see melting flesh on, it's like I'm naturally a little bit sort of reluctant to exploit something graphically. So my natural tendency to step back, not unlike the scene in Sneakers when they shoot the guy in the car, the camera drops back probably 50 feet, so you see that in a long shot. And that's just my sensibility. And I think that sensibility worked in Some of All Fears. I think it helped people get through that without throwing up, because the real stuff would be just horrendous.
I think it's a really successful sequence because you don't do the sort of James Cameron effect of seeing someone getting fried and like the skin falling off, and that was an amazing effect in like 91, 92, I think, when Terminator 2 came out. But I think what you did with it was far more. First of all, I don't want to say realistic because I don't have any sort of frame of reference to say it is realistic personally, but there is a disorientation in the way you're shooting it because it's someone who is just at work and their windows blow out and the whole room just disappears into a cloud of smoke. You can't see the blast. You're just blown through. And one thing it evoked in me, I don't know if this is a film you've ever seen or if it was a touchstone for you designing it, but it's the BBC film from 1984, Threads, which is about a nuclear bomb hitting Sheffield.
Wow.
And it's just Sheffield. It's one half of the film is people going about their lives, and in the background you'll see news reports saying Russia has talked about invading blah blah blah, but it's just about like, hey, this guy's got a girlfriend and they're going on a date and it's lovely, and then boom, and you just see chaos. You see, windows smashing, cameras falling over, and it's just utter debris. And the next 20 minutes are just people scrabbling around trying to pick their lives back up in dirt, and then it's just the world falling apart afterwards. It's quite a tough film to watch. If you haven't seen it, I'd actually recommend it. But I just thought, like, I've spoken about this before, but I've said to many people, the sum of all fears, that scene is threads with money. Like you dialed it up, and I feel like it's so good at capturing that panic, because you wouldn't know what's happening. You're just thrown across the room or out of a helicopter.
Right. Yes, all you know is your own experience of it, and you're cut off from the rest of it. And that was sort of the key insight when I realized, let's tell it from the point of view of the survivors. That necessitated us cutting off the points of view. It's like it's just what that person experiences at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was the best way for the audience to relate to the horror of it.
And I suppose, sort of wrapping up my thoughts on Sum of All Fears, obviously the film comes out. Were you asked to come back was there talk of doing a sequel to Sum of All Fears, having Ben Affleck back and sort of moving on from there? Because obviously it didn't happen for a while, then Chris Pine took over the role.
There was talk. At the time, I remember the studio saying Clancy would like to write a new story for you and Ben.
Mm.
And I had said, because I don't like I get bored easily, I said, you know what, I don't want to repeat myself. The next thing I do, I'd like it to be very different from this. So I'm not really looking to get into another one of these right now. I said to Ben, I'd love to work with you anytime, but I don't want to do another one of these right now.
Mm-hmm.
I would get bored. I would feel like, oh, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't do my best work. I need to be challenged. I need to feel like I'm in over my head, like Jack Ryan. And I felt like it was just a mistake for me to do the same thing. So I dropped out of that, and I don't know what happened with the discussions about the other film for Ben.
Then I'm conscious that we've just spent 2 hours breaking down 2 movies, and I feel like I have a billion more questions, but I'll wrap us up with a couple of questions. And this one I want to hear from you, because what are you currently working on? What's on your sort of planner for the next year or so?
I'm writing 2 limited series.
Mm-hmm.
They're both period stories. One is about an inventor. They're both true stories, and the other is about Nuremberg, about one of the Nuremberg trials. I'll tell you, the inventor is. I'm adapting David McCulloch's book about the Wright brothers.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's quite interesting. So I'm working on both of those. I don't generally like to work on 2 things at a time, but they both came up, and they're both really special projects, and I quite love them, and I love the people I'm working with. So, I'm keeping the store open nights and weekends.
Watch this space. Okay, we got some more Phil Alden Robinson coming on our screen soon. That's what I want to hear. Now I note that you've only done 2 spy movies so far. Is there a third potentially in the works somewhere in your brain? And can we make it a trilogy, please?
I'd love to. I've actually been talking with some spies about a bunch of things that one of these days I hope we get to make. Because it's like made for movies, It's like, what's better?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a sucker for that stuff. And the real stuff is just fascinating to talk to people who really were operatives. They have such great stories, and it's every boy's dream to be Cloak and Dagger, and we don't get to do it. Some people get to do it, and they have spectacular stories to tell from it. So I'm hoping there's a bunch of guys I've been talking to, and I'd love to do one. I'd love to see great spy movies getting made. I've been watching Slow Horses, which I've been enjoying.
Yep, fantastic.
The first season in particular, I think, is wonderful. It's just fun.
If you do get another chance and you want to write in a really inept British and Canadian duo, they get blown up very early in the film, please do.
I know who to call.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the last question that we sign off all of our interviews with. and I'm actually really keen to hear this answer because we've spoken about this for 2 hours, and we've not heard you sort of slip a sort of clue. Phil Alden Robinson, I am desperate to know, what is your favorite spy movie of all time?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is 3 Days of the Condor.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's as close to perfect as it can be. I also am very fond of I don't know if it was BBC, but it was the limited series with Alec Guinness as Smiley.
Yeah.
The Tinker Tailor Smiley series.
Smiley's Game.
Smiley's Game. I thought that was so brilliant, and in its understated portrayal of the reality of spying. So for me, it would be those two things. But I think Guinness as Smiley, that series, and there were two series, weren't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I love that. Just love it. I could watch it again tomorrow.
And on the show, we do something called the Knock List, which is our need to see official classics of the spy film world. And so every week when we review a movie, we decide whether it is worthy of being inducted. Sneakers made it on the list, as did 3 Days of the Condor. So you're right next to it.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's I'll take that.
Yep.
It's high praise from us, at least. It
Yeah,
may not
that's
be
right, that's right.
It's not a trophy on your shelf, but we can send you a paper trophy. You can put it up if you'd like.
It sounds good to me.
Phil, this has gone beyond my expectations. I cannot thank you enough for the time you spent with us. I know everyone listening has been in rapture hearing these stories. So I just want to say, Phil Alden Robinson, thank you for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, Scott and Cam. I love what you're doing, and I had a great time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Phil Alden Robinson talking sneakers, Field of Dreams, the sum of all fears, and his favorite spy movies. And I said it at the start. It's one of our favorites we've ever done, and I stick to it.
Yeah, we just want to thank Phil so much for his time, because this was a exhaustive journey into sneakers. Like, he gave us
I'm tired. I'm really knackered.
He gave us all the details and was more than happy to hang out with us for an afternoon, going through all of the nerdy questions we had about sneakers, as well as the sum of all fears, really covering some great spy films there. And just the main thing I took away from this was the amount of integrity behind Sneakers, a movie he keeps referring to as kind of shiny stuff, like it was intended as just kind of a studio fun movie. But the amount of integrity behind the scenes in shaping the story, creating the visual look of the film, every step of the way, even when it came to marketing and trying some ambitious things that had never been done before in terms of selling sneakers to an audience. This was a movie that consistently had a vision from beginning to end.
No, you just have to think that this film had like a 10-year gestation period.
Mm-hmm.
There's films that are coming out now that could have used a 10-year gestation period.
No kidding, yeah.
Right. I mean, sometimes things spend too long on the boil, right? And they are perhaps overworked, and too many cooks in the kitchen. I'm using a lot of metaphors here. But what I'm trying to say is this actually bucks that trend. Sneakers took a long time to get right. But the work that the whole team, including Phil, put into it, I think shows on the screen, and I don't think it misses a beat. I know I had a couple of hang-ups about the film, looking back on it, but ultimately, there's a reason why it ended up on the knock list.
I was going to say as well that this movie, it performed reasonably well in theaters, but it was not a slam-bang hit, but has very much earned its cult audience. And and Phil Alden Robinson seems very touched just that it has that audience that sustains its life.
Yeah, and Phil Alden Robinson is synonymous, I think, most with Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
And not to take that away from him, quite rightly so. It's a fantastic film, one that hits quite close to my heart as a man with daddy issues. I'm not a big baseball guy, but there is a part of that film that will always speak to me. And so getting to speak to Phil just about Field of Dreams was a revelation. But you could tell from speaking to him that much as he is very passionate about Field of Dreams, and I think that probably is still his pride and joy, I think he holds Sneakers very near and dear, probably quite close to Field of Dreams in his list of films that he really enjoyed making. And to get to geek out with us for a couple of hours about a film that he loved doing and geeked out about doing it himself, with all the tech stuff they looked into, all the research they did. It's just, I think I'm glad that we could be part of him feeling that that's getting recognized more than necessarily Field of Dreams has, which has had countless years and decades of recognition.
Definitely. And it was also us tipping a little bit towards the Jack Ryan world, which will be coming in the future on the show when we'll do all the movies. But this was our first real example of talking to someone related to the films who could actually give us stories about the production. And Some of All Fears is one that I feel like is being kind of unfairly forgotten.
Yeah.
People remember the Harrison Ford ones and Hunt for Red October, of course. But I feel like this one is kind of not necessarily getting the level of lifespan that it deserves, because I think of like the Chris Pine one, Shadow Recruit, which was really kind of boilerplate stuff.
Yeah.
Some of All Fears takes wild chances, and we talk about those chances in the interview.
Yeah, it drops a nuke in the middle of America. Like it
Yeah.
really does swing for the fences. There's some and I referenced some things in the interview, and I recommend you all go and check that film out. It's actually a lot closer to the Jack Ryan we see in Hunt for Red October than the Harrison Ford version you get for the middle two films.
And yeah, like Scott said, I recommend people track down that movie if they haven't seen it, or if they have, give it a revisit, because it was just great hearing Phil Alden Robinson talk about bringing that film to the screen. And it's too bad it didn't make more of an impact at the box office. It did well, though, but didn't make more of an impact because it would have been cool to see a follow-up.
No, exactly. I'd say, like, give it another try. We haven't reviewed it yet, so we'll come to that down the line, but I think it's got a lot to offer for the spy movie fans out there, and also those who like sort of Jack Ryan films. As Phil pointed out, it was kind of approved by Jack Ryan himself.
Yeah, no kidding.
But there you go. That was another chapter in our Sneakers book. Might we have another Sneakers interview down the road? You never do know on Spyhards.
That's right. Robert Redford can comment on it when we are talking to him about the Casino Royale 67 film.
And that's a joke from a different episode.
That's for our year-end wrap-up episode, which was last week. So you can't have forgotten already.
No, that's true. You should know this. Continuity, folks. Come on. But yeah, as I said at the beginning, what a delight. It's been a pleasure talking sneakers again. And I do want to thank Phil, myself, for taking the time to sit down with us. We hope you've enjoyed that discussion. But we're moving on to our first film of 2025. And Cam, how are we starting the year off?
Yes, we are going to kick off our 2025 films by hanging out with Lee Marvin and Robert Shaw and looking at 1979's Avalanche Express.
It's a very provocative film title and a film with a bit of a history to it too.
Yeah, kind of a sad history. There's a lot on the behind the scenes to do with this one. And a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff is very evident when you actually watch the movie. So this will be an interesting episode.
Yeah, I mean, I actually would probably spoil it a little bit ahead of time and just sort of say, not to say like knock lists or anything like that. This is not a spoiler for that, but more just, it's an interesting film to watch.
Yeah.
And hear a discussion about. So if you have the time over the next week after listening to this interview, I'd say go and check it out and watch it along with us and hear the discussion. So your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to hop aboard the train as we head on to the Avalanche Express. If you like what you heard on this episode and you want to help support Spyhards, there's only one place to do it, and that's on Patreon, folks. We have over 100 bonus episodes available for you now to peruse, partake, and any other P word that you think might suit this metaphor. And from very, very low prices as well, but you're basically just helping keep the lights on here at Spyhards HQ. We're not taking money off the top to feed our lavish caviar eating and champagne drinking lifestyles. It's basically just to keep the lights on here at Spyhards HQ and pay for all the services we need to put the show out for you free every week. So if you have a spare penny or two and you can lend it to us, join us over on Patreon at patreon.com/Spyhards. And if you want to continue the discussion about sneakers and Phil Alden Robinson, Some of All Fears online, you can find us on all the social media platforms at Spyhards, SPYHARDS, wherever one might social media. But until next time, folks, you'll find Cam and I hard at work on a Netflix docudrama trying to get to the bottom of who created the sneakers prank.